The studio lights burned with heat as Dan Bongino sat opposite Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, his jaw tight and his eyes flashing with anger he was barely holding back. What began as a normal political discussion on his podcast was about to turn into one of the most talked about clashes of the year. "You think you can come on my show and lie to my audience?" Bongino's voice sliced through the room like a blade, his hand slamming hard on the desk between them. The sound rang out in the studio as the cameras caught every single moment of what would soon be remembered as a defining scene in modern political media. But Congresswoman Crockett didn't move. She sat completely calm, a faint smile resting on her lips, as though she had been waiting for this exact moment all along. What she said next would not only shut Bongino down, but also send shockwaves across social media that are still being felt today. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these explosive political moments. Drop a comment below and tell us what you think happened next. This wasn't just another heated political argument. This was the moment when a calm, composed Congresswoman showed the whole country how to deal with a bully using grace, intelligence, and powerful precision. What took place over the next 20 minutes would change how America viewed both of these political figures forever. The atmosphere in that studio was so tense you could almost slice it in half. Bongino, once a Secret Service agent and now a loud conservative personality, believed he was in control. He had brought Crockett onto his program expecting to overpower her with the aggressive questioning style that had made him famous. But he was about to discover that this young congresswoman from Texas was not the kind of politician who would collapse under pressure. Just minutes before the recording began, Bongino had been pacing behind his desk, building himself up for what he wanted to be a career highlight takedown. His producer had walked him through Crockett's history, her voting record, and what they believed were her weak spots. They had prepared a set of trap questions meant to make her seem clueless, out of touch, and feeble. The strategy was simple: strike quickly, strike hard, and keep going until she broke. Meanwhile, Crockett had shown up to the studio half an hour early. While Bongino was pacing and preparing his attack, she was quietly going over her notes, double-checking her facts, and mentally preparing for the exact kind of aggressive encounter she expected. Her chief of staff had warned her this wouldn't be a normal interview, but she had chosen to do it anyway. She had a message to deliver, and no intimidation was going to silence her. The production crew was buzzing with anticipation. They knew Bongino's style and had seen how other Democratic guests reacted to his aggressive approach. Most either got defensive and shouted back, making themselves look just as unbalanced as him, or they stumbled through their answers, appearing weak and unready. Either way, Bongino usually came out looking like the victor. But something about Crockett's calmness as she waited in her seat felt different. Her quiet confidence seemed almost unusual given what everyone knew was coming. The lighting tech later admitted he had never seen a guest look that relaxed. Before one of Bongino's surprise attack interviews, the stage was ready for a huge clash between two completely opposite styles of political debate. On one side was Bongino, loud, aggressive, interrupting, and trying to control through sheer force of personality. On the other side sat Crockett, calm, precise, well-prepared, and entirely steady in her composure. What happened next would become a masterclass in staying dignified under attack, and the internet was about to notice in a big way. To really understand the explosive moment that was about to happen, you need to know who these two political figures truly are, and why their meeting meant far more than a single heated conversation. Dan Bongino had built his media empire on being the loudest in the room. The former Secret Service agent, who once protected President Obama, had transformed himself into one of conservative media's most combative voices. His podcast regularly ranked among the top political shows, drawing millions of listeners who tuned in specifically to hear him dismantle Democrats with his fast-paced accusations and heated interruptions. Bongino's climb to conservative media fame wasn't instant. After leaving the Secret Service in 2011, he tried politics, running for Congress in Maryland and later for Senate, but failed both times. Those losses only fueled his anger at what he saw as a corrupt political class, and he poured that frustration into a media career built on conflict and controversy. His show became a go-to for conservatives who believed mainstream outlets weren't fighting hard enough for their values. Bongino became their champion, the man who would speak what others feared to say and act when others wouldn't. Phrases like "liberalism is a mental disorder" and "Democrats hate America" became rallying cries For his loyal audience, his method was straightforward but effective: drown out your opponent with volume and aggression. Never let them finish speaking, and declare victory by sheer dominance. It had worked for years against guests who came expecting a normal political discussion. His fans loved watching Democrats stumble, and his subscriber numbers reflected it. His business model was simple: create conflict, make viral clips, drive engagement, and watch the ad revenue rise. Bongino had turned political interviews into theater, casting himself as the heroic conservative fighter against what he called liberal lies and corruption. But Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was a different type of opponent. The 43-year-old lawyer from Texas had proven herself in some of the toughest political battles in the country. Before entering Congress, she was a civil rights attorney who had stood toe-to-toe with some of Texas's most powerful figures and won. She wasn't easily shaken, and she certainly wasn't afraid of bullies. Crockett's path to Congress had been far from smooth. Raised in a working-class home, she put herself through law school while juggling multiple jobs. Her early years as a public defender taught her how to keep her composure and think strategically even in high-pressure situations. She had defended clients with everything on the line, learning that preparation and calmness could outmatch any amount of intimidation. Her shift from criminal defense to civil rights law sharpened her even further. She took on cases others refused, defending victims of police violence and fighting systemic injustice in Texas's legal system. She faced death threats, smear campaigns, and every underhanded tactic possible from those who wanted her silenced. In Congress, she earned a reputation as one of the sharpest legal minds in the building. Her trial experience taught her to keep her cool under attack, think quickly, and most importantly, use her opponent's aggression against them. She had already gone viral for her composed but sharp responses in congressional hearings. This showdown wasn't just about these two people. It was about two completely different styles of political communication. Bongino represented the older, shout louder than your opponent approach. Crockett embodied a new wave of leaders who believed skill, preparation, and calm could beat bluster. In a political climate full of yelling instead of real debate, many Americans longed for leaders who could keep their dignity while fighting for their ideas. This interview was about to test whether professionalism could still win in the era of political theater. Adding to its importance was the reality of the social media age. Viral moments could make or end political careers in hours. One clip, shared millions of times, could permanently shape public opinion. Both Bongino and Crockett knew that whatever happened here would likely be seen by millions within hours. The environment itself heightened the drama. This was Bongino's territory, his studio, his program, his terms. From the start, he held every advantage: the lighting, the camera positioning, even the way the seats were placed. All were arranged to make him appear dominant and his guests diminished. It was political theater executed with precision. The studio was like a fortress for conservative thought. American flags stood on both sides of the set, and the walls behind him displayed framed photographs of Bongino, alongside various Republican figures. The desk separating them was more than just furniture. It served as a physical barrier, allowing him to control the space and lean toward guests whenever he wanted to exert pressure. Everything about the arrangement reminded visitors that they were in his territory. But Crockett had accepted the invitation fully aware of what awaited her. She had studied Bongino's interview style, reviewed his methods, and prepared for exactly the type of forceful exchange she was about to face. She wasn't only ready to engage, she intended to win. Her preparation had been both detailed and deliberate. She had watched hours of his past interviews, spotting his habits, identifying trigger phrases, and noting the points where he typically lost his temper. She rehearsed keeping her composure with her communications team, doing practice interviews where staff members acted as increasingly aggressive versions of Bongino. She even reviewed footage of legendary trial lawyers handling hostile questioning, searching for techniques she could adapt for a political setting. Few people knew that Crockett had faced far harsher situations than anything Bongino could present. As a civil rights attorney in Texas, she had confronted some of the most influential and unyielding adversaries in the state. She had endured threats, intimidation, and personal attacks that made political debates seem almost polite. For her, this was just another day's work, the kind of challenge she had built her career on while defending justice in unfriendly environments. The bigger picture made this exchange even more important. Political conversation in America had reached a breaking point, with yelling often replacing meaningful discussion on nearly every major topic. Social media had fueled the worst instincts in political dialogue, rewarding the loudest and most extreme voices. Many citizens were weary of the endless hostility and searching for leaders who could set a better example. Bongino embodied much of what critics saw as wrong with current political media. His program had become a hub for conspiracy theories, personal jabs, and toxic speech that weakened democratic discourse. His supporters loved how he owned liberals. Yet, his style fed into a political atmosphere where effective governance was becoming nearly impossible. Crockett stood for something different, a newer generation of leaders who believed toughness didn't have to mean cruelty, and that fighting for principles didn't require sacrificing decency. She arrived in Congress recognized as one of its sharpest legal minds, but also for her ability to keep her professionalism intact during the most intense disputes. The political stakes were enormous. The interview came only weeks before a pivotal election, with control of Congress hanging in the balance. Every viral clip, every social media share, every headline born from political clashes could sway thousands of voters. Both sides knew that the outcome of this conversation could reach far beyond personal image. The discussion began in a routine manner, with Bongino posing basic questions about recent legislation and democratic priorities. But from the very first exchange, the rising tension was obvious. Bongino's voice carried the sharp tone his regular listeners recognized as a sign that he was preparing for an attack. "Congresswoman, your party keeps talking about helping working families, but your policies are destroying the middle class," he began, his tone already a notch louder. "How do you justify voting for bills that are clearly hurting the very people you claim to represent?" Crockett answered evenly, citing concrete data and examples from her district. But Bongino wasn't interested in her real answer. He was building toward a bigger moment, and experienced viewers could see it coming. "That's not what I asked you," he interrupted, his volume rising more. "I asked how you justify harming working families. Are you going to answer the question or keep repeating talking points?" This was the first clear warning sign. Crockett had, in fact, addressed his question directly. Bongino was employing one of his signature tactics, claiming a guest hadn't answered, even when they had, to make them appear evasive, and give himself permission to become more aggressive. "Mr. Bongino, I did answer your question," Crockett replied, her voice calm and professional. "I gave specific examples of how our policies have benefited working families in my district. If you'd like, I can provide more detail." But Bongino was already pressing the next escalation. "Don't give me that lawyer double talk. My audience isn't stupid. They can see through politicians like you who come here and try to spin everything." The heat in the room rose quickly. Behind the camera, Bongino's producer gestured encouragingly, knowing this conflict would drive engagement and produce shareable clips. This was exactly the kind of exchange that drew subscribers and boosted downloads. In the control area, the team was energized. They had seen the script before, Bongino beginning with moderate questions, then steadily raising the intensity, until guests either broke under pressure or lost their temper. Either reaction meant viral material for days. The audio technician carefully balanced the sound levels to avoid distortion from Bongino's louder delivery, while still capturing every detail of what was now a clearly hostile conversation. Camera operators had instructions to emphasize facial expressions and body language, knowing that the visual narrative might be more impactful than the spoken words. Crockett stayed composed, though her eyes hinted she was already mapping her next step. She had faced aggressive questioners before and knew how to handle those who relied on volume to dominate. "I respect that you have strong views, Mr. Bongino," she said, her tone steady and professional. "I'm here for a real conversation about the issues important to your audience. If you'd prefer a discussion instead of a shouting match, I'm ready whenever you are." That reply seemed to push Bongino further toward frustration. He wasn't accustomed to guests holding their composure under his pressure. By this stage, Democratic guests usually either became defensive and shouted back or faltered and stumbled over their words. Either outcome created the viral clip he sought. But Crockett wasn't giving him either. She stayed calm, professional, and firmly focused on substance. It was completely disrupting his whole game plan, and the frustration was clearly visible on his face. His normal confidence was beginning to crumble as he realized that his usual, reliable tactics were failing against this particular opponent. The discussion then turned to immigration policy, and Bongino spotted his chance for a more personal attack. "Let's talk about the border crisis your party has caused," he said, his tone growing sharper and more accusatory. "You represent a district in Texas. Yet you vote like someone who has never witnessed the real-life effects of illegal immigration. How do you sleep at night knowing your policies are putting American lives in danger? It was a heavily loaded question meant to corner Crockett, forcing her either to defend policies that polls showed were unpopular, or to distance herself from her own party. But Crockett had handled such attacks before, and she was ready with a reply that would completely flip the situation. Mr. Bongino, I have spent significant time at the border speaking with Border Patrol agents, immigration officials, and community leaders from both parties, she answered calmly. I have seen the problems firsthand, and I have worked with both Republicans and Democrats to create solutions that address the root causes of migration, while keeping our border secure. If you'd like to discuss specific policy plans, I'm happy to do that. Her answer was brilliant. It instantly proved her experience and credibility while inviting a real discussion about the issue. But Bongino wasn't aiming for substance. He wanted a fight. You know what? I'm sick of this, Bongino said, his voice now raised and aggressive. You Democrats come on these shows, dodge questions, twist everything, and then pretend you're taking the high road. My audience deserves better than your political games. The irony was thick. You could cut it with a knife. Bongino was accusing Crockett of political games, while turning the conversation into exactly the kind of dramatic clash his brand thrived on. But Crockett saw the trap he was setting. Mr. Bongino, I have answered every question you've asked, she replied, her voice steady but carrying a hint of firmness. I've given facts, data, and clear examples. If you have more questions about policy, I'm here to discuss them. But I will not take part in a shouting match just to create drama. That was like tossing fuel onto a fire. Bongino's face flushed red, his voice climbing to the volume his audience knew meant an explosion was coming. Cameras were rolling, and the tension in the studio was about to break. Drama? You think this is about drama? He shouted. This is about your party destroying this country while you act like nothing's wrong. My listeners work hard for their money, and your policies are taking food off their tables. Crockett's response to this heat would become the turning point of the interview. Rather than reacting defensively or emotionally, she did something that completely neutralized Bongino's aggressive tactics. She smiled, not a smug or mocking smile, but a genuine, professional one that showed she was fully at ease. That single expression shifted the power dynamic instantly. Bongino now looked like the one losing control, while Crockett came across as the composed adult in the room. Bongino realized his usual approach wasn't working, which only made him more agitated and more likely to make a mistake that could define the rest of the interview. The stage was set for the explosive moment that would soon dominate social media. Frustrated, Bongino decided to go all out. He stood, leaned over the desk, and launched into a verbal attack that shattered every rule of professional conduct. You know what your problem is, he yelled, face bright red and finger pointing at Crockett. You think you can come into my house, on my show, and lie to my audience? You think because you're some big-shot lawyer from Texas you can outsmart me? I've been doing this longer than you've been in politics. The noise level in the studio was almost painful. Bongino was in full-on attack mode, using his presence and aggressive stance to pressure Crockett into retreating or losing her composure. It was political theater at its ugliest, and soon millions would see it. Camera operators were switching between tight shots of Bongino's red face and Crockett's calm expression. The contrast was so sharp it looked like footage from two completely different interviews. Behind the scenes, Bongino's team was debating whether this was brilliant TV or a disaster in the making. The clip would go viral, but perhaps not for the reasons they wanted. The sound crew scrambled to lower the audio levels as Bongino's shouting reached construction site decibel levels. Yet Crockett's voice stayed as steady and professional as it had been from the start. Then she delivered another masterstroke. She didn't flinch, raise her voice, or interrupt. She stayed seated, locked eyes with him, and waited patiently, as though handling a child's tantrum. Her body language told its own story, while Bongino stood gesturing wildly and invading her space. Crockett sat upright, hands neatly folded, her face attentive but fearless. It was a lesson in nonverbal communication that spoke louder than words. When Bongino finally paused to breathe, Crockett spoke in a calm, authoritative tone. Mr. Bongino, I can see you're very passionate about your beliefs, and I respect that. But I believe your audience deserves better than watching you yell at a guest who came here in good faith to have a conversation. Her words landed with precision. In one sentence, she acknowledged his passion without endorsing his behavior. claimed the moral high ground, and appealed directly to the audience's sense of fairness. It was political communication at its best. The silence afterward was electric. You could even hear the faint hum of the air conditioning as the studio absorbed what had just happened. Bongino stood there with his mouth slightly parted, clearly not expecting such a steady and devastating reply to his outburst. But she wasn't finished yet. While Bongino remained momentarily frozen by her calm handling of his eruption, Crockett went on with a delivery so perfectly balanced it could have passed for rehearsed, though everyone present knew it was entirely off the cuff. I understand that your livelihood depends on creating conflict and stirring controversy. That's your business model, and it's clearly been profitable for you. But I am not here to serve as a prop for your act. I'm here to talk about the real problems that impact real people in my district and across this country. The camera captured Bongino's face in perfect detail. You could see the precise second he realized his aggressive style had spectacularly backfired. Instead of making Crockett appear weak or rattled, he had made himself look like an unrestrained bully attacking a composed professional. His trademark confident swagger dissolved right in front of everyone. The man whose career thrived on never being short of words was now completely speechless, standing awkwardly beside his desk while his guest sat calmly, having just delivered a crushing evaluation of his entire style of political argument. Then, Crockett delivered the line that would become the most repeated quote from the whole interview. "If you'd like to have an adult conversation about policy disagreements, I'm ready. But if your goal is just to yell and point fingers, you can do that without me." The silence afterward was almost tangible. Bongino, who had built his whole image on always knowing what to say, couldn't get a word out. He slowly sat back in his chair, his face still flushed, but his voice now far quieter. "I'm not yelling," he muttered weakly, a statement that struck everyone present as absurd, considering he had literally been shouting moments earlier. "I'm just passionate about protecting my audience from politicians who don't tell the truth." Crockett's reply was quick and precise. "Mr. Bongino, I've been telling the truth this entire interview. I've given facts, figures, and clear examples. What I haven't done is yell, point fingers, or question your character. The contrast is obvious." It was over. At that point, everyone in the studio understood that Crockett had turned the tables entirely. What was meant to be Bongino's aggressive takedown of a Democratic lawmaker had instead become a showcase of how professionalism and poise can defeat bullying and intimidation. The interview went on, but the energy had shifted completely. Bongino, clearly shaken by how badly his attack had failed, spent the remaining minutes trying to regain his footing. But every question he posed now seemed trivial and petty compared to his earlier outburst, and every composed, fact-based answer from Crockett only cemented her image as the mature presence in the room. When it finally ended, Bongino's face showed that he knew the exchange had gone wrong. His trademark swagger had vanished, replaced by the look of someone who had been outmaneuvered by a sharper opponent. Crockett, on the other hand, stayed professional and polite, even thanking him for having her on as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. The contrast was clear and impossible to miss. One person had held on to dignity and professionalism from start to finish, while the other had lost composure and fallen back on shouting. And intimidation that had blown up in his face every second had been caught on camera, and the internet was about to render its judgment. Within minutes of the interview ending, clips were spreading online at a dizzying pace. The segment of Bongino's outburst followed by Crockett's calm response was being shared, reposted, and retweeted across platforms all at once. Within the first hour, Crockett stays calm was trending nationwide on Twitter. The reaction was instant and overwhelming. Political voices from all sides were weighing in, and the agreement across the board was rare. Even conservatives who usually supported Bongino praised Crockett's poise and criticized his loss of control. "I watch Bongino all the time, but that was embarrassing," one conservative influencer tweeted. "Crockett handled herself like a pro, and he looked like he was having a meltdown. We can disagree on policy without screaming at people." The fastest spreading compilation clip highlighted the stark difference between them. It opened with Bongino standing, shouting, and pointing, then cut straight to Crockett sitting calmly, speaking evenly, and keeping steady eye contact. The contrast needed no narration, it told the whole story visually. Liberal media outlets pounced on the moment, but what made it truly remarkable was that criticism of Bongino wasn't just coming from the left. Conservative commentators known for using similar aggressive tactics were quietly distancing themselves from his performance. realizing he had crossed a line that hurt their entire cause. "This is why people hate politics," wrote a moderate Republican strategist. Crockett came on in good faith, answered with facts and data, and he responded by screaming at her like a child. She made him look foolish without even trying. The numbers confirmed just how viral it had gone. Bongino's own team's clip had been shared over 50,000 times within 2 hours. But the comments section was full of unexpected pushback. Instead of defending him, most commenters praised Crockett's professionalism and criticized his behavior. Media analysts began breaking the interview down frame by frame, calling it a perfect example of effective political communication. A former White House communications director told CNN she did everything right. She stayed calm, stuck to facts, avoided taking the bait, and turned his aggression into proof of her own professionalism. It was masterful. But perhaps the most damaging blow came from Bongino's own followers. Comments on his podcast page showed disappointment from longtime fans. "I've listened to Dan for years, but that was tough to watch," one wrote. "She was answering his questions, and he just started screaming at her. That's not the conservatism I support." As the hours passed, the difference between them grew even clearer. While Bongino was hit with increasing criticism, Crockett was being praised from surprising places. Conservative women especially noted she had shown the exact balance of strength and grace they wanted in leaders. News outlets sought follow-up statements from both. Crockett's office issued a short note that was polite yet reinforced her message. Congresswoman Crockett believes in substantive policy discussions, even with those who disagree with her. She remains committed to respectful dialogue on issues that matter to American families. When Bongino finally responded, it only worsened things for him. Rather than admit he had lost his temper or apologize, he doubled down. "I'm not going to apologize for being passionate about defending my audience from politicians who want to destroy our country." If Crockett was unable to handle difficult questions, then she had no place in Congress. Yet to anyone who had actually watched the interview, the flaw in that claim was obvious. Crockett had answered every question flawlessly. It was Bongino who struggled to cope with her calm and fact-based replies. His effort to twist the narrative only strengthened the perception that he refused to take responsibility for his conduct. The long-term impact of this exchange reached far beyond these two political figures. Crockett's composed reaction was going viral and was being cited as proof that American voters wanted a new kind of political conversation. Surveys taken in the days after the interview revealed that a large majority of voters, regardless of political party, favored Crockett's style of communication. Political strategists from both parties were paying close attention. The old formula of political media battles, where the loudest voice came out on top, was now being challenged by a style that valued composure, truth, and professionalism. Crockett had demonstrated that it was possible to win a political clash without shouting or losing self-respect. Across the country, political science professors began using the interview as a teaching example. Dr. Sarah Mitchell of Georgetown University School of Public Policy told her students that the Bongino-Crockett exchange might mark a turning point in U.S. political communication. "What we saw was proof that calm professionalism can outweigh aggressive theatrics," she explained. "It pushes back against the idea that yelling is the only way to be heard in modern politics." The interview also hinted at a shift in how political media might treat controversial guests in the future. Behind the scenes, other hosts were questioning if Bongino's combative style could still work in a world where viral clips could make or destroy reputations overnight. The danger of appearing like a bully attacking a composed professional was too high. Cable news executives were even holding urgent meetings about their own shows. Crockett's success with a calm approach was forcing them to rethink whether the confrontational style dominating political TV for years was still effective. Focus groups after the interview revealed that audiences were growing increasingly tired of hosts who lost their temper or aggressively went after guests. Late-night comedy programs seized the opportunity. Saturday Night Live produced a full sketch based on the exchange, portraying the Bongino character becoming more and more unhinged while the Crockett character stayed perfectly calm, eventually offering him a glass of water and asking if he needed a break. That sketch also went viral, reinforcing the public view that Bongino had humiliated himself. More importantly, the clash boosted Crockett's national profile in a way years of regular political work might never have done. She was being booked on top news shows, featured in major magazines, and spoken of as an emerging star in the Democratic Party. all for staying composed in the face of bullying. Political donors noticed as well. In the weeks after the interview, her fundraising totals soared, with small contributions flowing in from across the United States. Her campaign reported donations from all 50 states, many accompanied by notes referencing the Bongino exchange. One donor from Oregon wrote, "I've never contributed to a politician outside my state before, but after watching her handle that bully so professionally, I had to help. We need more leaders like her." The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee quickly decided to feature Crockett in national ads, recognizing that her composed style could stand out against Republican candidates, known for more aggressive rhetoric. Internal polling showed that swing voters responded especially well to her manner. Meanwhile, Republican strategists were having uncomfortable internal discussions about the consequences of the interview. If calm professionalism was starting to outperform aggressive confrontation, it could be a serious problem for politicians who built their reputations on being political fighters. Some advisors quietly urged their clients to tone down their attacks and focus on substantive policy points. The interview also sparked broader debates on gender dynamics in political media. Female commentators pointed out that Crockett had navigated a form of aggressive exchange that had often damaged women's careers in politics. By staying calm and professional, she avoided the common trap where female politicians are labeled as shrill or emotional when they respond forcefully to attacks. "What Jasmine did was brilliant," said former White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki on her podcast. "She managed to be strong without being aggressive, to defend herself without sounding defensive. That's a balance women in politics have to master, and she nailed it." The story was far from finished. Analysts were already speculating about how this moment would affect both figures going forward. Would Bongino change his approach or stick with aggressive confrontation? Would Crockett's composed style become a template for others facing hostile interviews? Members of Congress from both sides of the aisle had noticed her skill. Some Republicans who had dismissed her before were now privately acknowledging her talent as a communicator. Several even reached out to express respect for how she had handled the moment, despite disagreeing with her politics. "You have to admire that kind of calm under pressure," one Republican congressman told a reporter anonymously. "I might not agree with her policies, but she showed real class. That's the kind of person you can work with." International news outlets from the UK, Canada, and Australia also picked up the story, pointing out the sharp contrast between Crockett's composure and Bongino's aggression. The Guardian ran a full article on what the exchange said about the state of American democracy. Book publishers and speaking agencies began contacting Crockett's office, sensing long-term potential from her viral moment. There was talk of a political communication book, university lectures, and invitations to global conferences on democracy. One thing was undeniable: in just one viral interview, the balance of power in political media had shifted. The belief that aggression and volume automatically brought victory had been dismantled. Sometimes the strongest way to face a bully is to simply refuse to be bullied. As the dust settled, it was clear that Crockett had shown the nation a better way to handle political conflict, and millions had taken note. The clip continued to circulate and be dissected months later. Now used as a teaching example in political communication, media trainers were revising their programs to include lessons from the Crockett method. As one consultant who coaches Fortune 500 executives put it, "The old playbook said to fight fire with fire. Jasmine showed that you can fight fire with ice. Often, the calmest person in the room is the most powerful one." Thanks for joining this deep dive into how Congresswoman Crockett turned a planned ambush into a masterclass in professional communication. If you found this breakdown insightful, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an analysis of moments that shape American politics. Share your thoughts in the comments. Is Crockett's calm style the future of political discourse, or will loud confrontation still rule? Stay tuned for our next video, where we'll explore how this viral moment is influencing the future of political media and why communication experts call it a game changer for handling hostile interviews.